Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show about all things writing, including author interviews, hints, tips, and story readings. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review, or just tell a friend. Let's get joined up.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination goes a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly, and Leah is going to be taking a bit of a break from co-hosting duties for a while, but I would encourage you to go over and check out her Smut with Brains series over on YouTube, and I will put a link in the show notes. So it's episode 57, and it's a bit of a relaunch of the show, complete with the new theme that you may or may not have noticed at the beginning. Yes, it's cheesy, and yes, that is me singing, but hopefully it'll be rattling around your heads for months to come, good or bad. Thanks a million as ever for the multi-talented George Odom of goguitarlessons.co.uk for recording, arranging and playing everything on that. Love it or loathe it, just let me know. I've got broad shoulders and I can take a bit of honest feedback. So not only have we got a great interview with novelist Nathan O'Hagan talking about his latest thriller, the trials and tribulations of fitting writing around his day job, and his new independent publishing outfit Obliterati Press, but also a brand new book review feature with a review from book blogger Amy Brown and a couple of really useful tweets of the week. Before we get into the interview, I just wanted to thank you all for the lovely messages we've had on Facebook and Twitter, letting us know that you do appreciate the show and you've noticed that we've actually been away for a bit of an extended break. Recent tweets from TW Ian and Jeffrey C. McAndrew were particularly welcome, and I'd encourage any of you to get in touch to let us know what you think of the show, ask any questions you might have, suggest guests, or fire any other random thoughts our way, and I'll be sure to give you a mention. Finally, I just wanted to mention our new bonus content, the epilogue, which is going to be a short 10-minute extra episode appearing between the full shows, where I'll go into a bit more detail about a specific topic or question with one of the guests. And I'm going to try to stick to a bi-weekly release schedule for the main shows, with the epilogue kind of fitting in between those, so it'll make it a weekly show again. Right, I've prattled on long enough, so let's get on with introducing this week's guest, Nathan O'Hagan. So we originally spoke to Nathan at the start of the year, following the release of his debut novel, The World Is Not a Cold Dead Place. His second book, Out of the City, was released after that. In February, and he's been busy with loads of other stuff in between. So this time around we started off with a bit of a catch-up. So hi Nathan, welcome back to Joined Up Writing, and I think last time we had you on, I think it was January. So I think last time we spoke, your next book, Out of the City, was just about to come out.
That's right, yeah, so it would have been January, yeah.
Yeah, which I've since read and really enjoyed. So well, why don't you just tell us in general what's been happening since we last spoke?
Well, that's the main thing. It was Out of the City came out in February, published by Armley Press again, who published The World's Not a Cold Dead Place, my first one. It's starting to sort of shift a few copies now. It seemed to be a little bit slow going to begin with. I think when you get your second one coming out, you kind of start to kid yourself that it's going to be like a huge breakthrough because you've had a bit of kind of modest success with the first one.
Yeah.
You sort of assume it's going to be similar again, and it all happened quite quickly when the first one came out. Within a matter of a couple of weeks it was selling quite a lot, but it's not happened quite the same way without the City. It seems to be a bit more of a slow burn effect, but it seems to be shifting quite a few Kindle copies rather than hard paper copies, which is interesting. I'm not quite sure why that is, if that's just reflective of people's sort of wider reading habits, but yeah, it's getting some good reviews. Got a good few reviews on Amazon, and getting a few people on Twitter getting in touch and saying they've read it and enjoyed it, and hopefully that'll get it a bit more word of mouth attention, which certainly was quite a big factor in The World's Not a Cold Dead Place doing quite well. There's lots of people talking about it on Twitter and recommending it to friends and that kind of thing. So hopefully it'll have a similar effect with Out of the City.
Brilliant. Well, for people that may or may not have listened to the last show or whatever, and obviously it's come out now, just remind us what Out of the City is about, and where you're coming from with it.
Yeah, well, it's a thriller. I hesitate to call it a crime thriller, but it's certainly a thriller with a lot of crime happening in it, which is set in Liverpool, contemporary Liverpool, and it's got three primary characters. The main one is a character called Nick Hanman, who's like a sort of fixer for wealthy and powerful people in Liverpool, sort of celebrities, footballers and businessmen and things like that. He's an ex-police officer who's developed a very strange and strong relationship with a very powerful local businessman called Michael Epson, who kind of manipulates Nick a lot into doing some pretty dastardly things. And Nick's a particularly sort of damaged individual, he's sort of traumatized by his childhood relationship with his father and his mother, who's deceased, and he's got lots of addiction, drug and drink issues, and lots of other pretty complex sort of personal problems. And this Michael Epson character kind of uses that to get him to do lots of things on his behalf. And he meets up. Well, he sort of intersects with two other characters who are separate storylines. There's a fellow called Scott Collins, who's a bodybuilder and local nightclub bouncer. He sort of is addicted to steroids, and he's going through his own personal crisis. And there's a teenage skateboarder called Chris McGann, who's also having his own sort of like identity problems and sort of like experimenting with his sexuality. And all these three characters just kind of come together at sort of the worst possible point for all three of them. And Nick hopes that something that happens in relation to that is going to give him a chance for some kind of shot at redemption and to better himself. But it's very violent, it's very dark, lots of pretty twisted things happen in it. But it's hopefully a good thriller as well. It's exploring lots of issues around like male sexuality, and the father-son dynamic in particular is quite a big theme in it. But it hopefully works, as a fairly straightforward thriller, whilst sort of exploring those issues as well at the same time.
Yeah, I think you're. I mean, obviously, I've read it. I think you're right to say I can understand why you're kind of a bit reticent to describe it as a pure kind of crime thriller, because it hasn't really got the same kind of structure as like a, in inverted commas, traditional crime novel. But obviously, as you say, there's loads of crime in it and stuff. And the biggest thing is, for a lot of the time, it reminded me in some ways of your first novel. I don't mean in terms of the storyline or anything, but from the perspective that we spend a lot of time inside these people's heads. We're very, very close to the people. I know it's not written in first person like the first book was, but we are quite close to the characters that are in it. We spend a lot of time in their heads, and as you've just alluded to, it's not always a particularly pleasant place to be.
No.
Some of the complex issues and stuff that they're going through. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was really entertaining. And you're right, it is a thriller in the fact that you are thinking, where is this going to go now? What horrible place is this, or what bad decision or bad choice is this person going to make, or whatever. Yeah, so yeah, I enjoyed it. It was good. I know last time when you mentioned, you did talk a little bit about writing it, and you mentioned that it was really quick to write, or relatively quick to write, the first draft or whatever. How did you find like the editing process, and in general, because I don't think we talked so much about that last time, how do you approach editing? Have you got like a process, like a set thing, or do you just kind of go, right, I've written the first draft, now I need to get it into a better shape?
Basically, yeah. I mean, I finished it, I kind of steamed through it in, I think, like 4 weeks, something like that. And I got to the end of it, I thought, well, I've written it so quickly, I just wanted to get the idea down, like a sort of skeletal framework. And I thought, I'll get to the end, and then I'll go back and make it not shit, because it's back in such a kind of frenzy, because, I just had all these ideas and just wanted to get it down as quickly as possible. Yeah. So I got to the end, thought, it's going to be rubbish, so I'll go back to the start, and I'm going to have, a load of work to do. It's probably going to take me, 5 or 6 times the length of time that it's taken to write the basic first draft. But it turned out the first draft was actually not bad. There wasn't a huge amount of editing to be done. Like structurally, it's pretty much exactly as it was, and it's, just sort of correcting little mistakes and little things like that, and, sort of fact checking certain things that you've had to research that you don't know about, because I don't really know about being a powerful, violent fixer of rich people's problems. So certain factors of that, you have to do a bit of googling and research, and then sort of extrapolate a little bit. And I sent a couple of emails to a mate of mine who's a copper, and just said, does this ring true? If this happened, would that sound realistic, sort of thing? Or if not, what would really happen there? Just little things like that, just to make it sound basically believable, But that was probably about the same sort of length of time again, really, about kind of 4 or 5 weeks of just sort of going through it, getting to the end, going back again and checking for it. And then John at Army Press did his own edit as well, but, mostly kind of formatting and things like that. So it looked a certain way that how he likes it to look, and he sort of sent a few suggestions and a few questions and stuff like that, and a couple of queries. But that again was probably a matter of a couple of weeks, him reading it and putting all his suggestions to me, and then the two of us kind of agreeing one or two things that he wasn't sure about. So it was probably a matter of like 10, 12 weeks from me starting to properly write it to us having the final finished draft. I'm not sure how many drafts it was. It was probably 4 or 5, but not with loads and loads of changes. It was more just tweaking it, really.
That's pretty impressive. It's very smooth. But how did that compare to your first one? Because I know from speaking to you last time about your first book, I think the kind of gist of it was you said that with hindsight, you were so keen to get it out there. You started sending it out pretty quickly, and then you found that over a period of time you were making changes as you were going along, because you were or were not getting feedback back on certain things, and it was quite a lengthy process in comparison.
Yeah, that was much more gradual, because I didn't have a publisher. I didn't have someone who wanted to put it out, and it's not like I had a deadline or anything with Army Press, but I had someone who would want to put the next book out, so I had someone to sort of work with and do it fairly quickly, whereas before it was a case of just getting rejections and the odd bit of feedback here and there. So you just sort of take your time with it, and you could go away for weeks or sometimes months at a time from it, and you sort of half forget about it, and then you go back to it with a sort of slightly fresher perspective, and you do it gradually over. Well, it was probably the best part of 10 years, just not solidly writing it for 10 years, but going back here and there, leaving it for 6 months at a time, and then going back after maybe sort of half-heartedly working on something else, but always being sort of drawn back to that, because I did think it was, potentially quite a strong piece of work, and I wanted to, get back to it and make sure I'd made it as good as it could possibly be. So it was a very different process in that sense, because I could take as long as I wanted or as little time as I wanted with the first one, whereas with Out of the City, I thought, well, I've got people who've read my first one, hopefully they'll read this one. I've got someone who wants to put it out, and it's sort of ready to go, so I wanted to get it done as quickly as possible. And it had been a reasonable length of time between the two. I think it was, by the time Out of the City came out, it was probably about 18 months, a little bit less maybe, which seems a reasonable sort of time frame to get a second book out after having a sort of relative success with your first one.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think, like you kind of mentioned it there, and I think this is true. I know last time we spoke about you were in bands and stuff, as I was when I was younger, and I know it's the same when you write music. It's knowing that there's somebody there that is actually interested in listening, in the case of music, but obviously reading your stuff or whatever. That definitely does make a difference, doesn't it? In terms of you want to get it out quickly, and you think, well, actually, someone's waiting to actually potentially read this or listen to it or whatever, and it kind of spurs you on, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you kind of don't want people to forget about you as well. I had quite a few people really liked my first book, and were nice enough to buy it, nice enough to read it, and then kind enough to take the time and trouble to get in touch with me and tell me, via Twitter or whatever. I thought, well, the least I can do is give them something else to read. They may not like it in the same way or as much as, but they kind of feel like you owe them one almost, so you want to give them something else to read. And that's another funny thing as well, the difference between your first and second. Your first one, you're essentially writing it for yourself, because you don't know whether it'll ever find an audience. But then with the second one, it's quite different, because you are writing for an audience to some degree, and it kind of worries you a little bit, because it's very different. Although, as you say, there's some similarities. Basically, it's a very different kind of novel, and you're kind of thinking, am I going to disappoint people and let people down? Because people responded particularly to the humour in the first book, and there's very little humour in Out of the City. So I was kind of thinking, is that going to disappoint people who thought the first one was really funny? Are they going to be let down or whatever? But so far that's not been the case. People who've read both, there's a handful of people who've read both and got in touch, and they just enjoy it in its own right. Most people who like books or music or whatever like all different types of books or music, don't they? So you kind of just got to go with what your vision is, your artistic vision or whatever, and hope that people respond to it.
Well, I think the thing that comes through, and especially having heard you say, in terms of the first book, how long you spent on it, on and off, like you say, coming back to it and all that kind of thing. I think the thing that comes through is that, you sort of found your voice. That time, those formative years, if you like, all that time spent working on that on and off, even if it was intermittent or whatever, has kind of, rightly or wrongly, has ended up with you, kind of having some kind of voice, distinctive voice. Because I think that it's probably not so easy for you to spot that because it's your work. Obviously, you can't really be objective about it. But having read both things, I think that's where the thing that comes through the similarity is that it's obvious to me anyway that the voice is similar. That the same writer wrote both things, even though one's in first person and one's in third person. I still think that comes across. I think that's good.
That's interesting. Yeah, I say you can't really judge that yourself because it's your own work. So that's interesting to hear someone say that actually.
And I suppose because you're sort of tackling similar themes as well. I know there's kind of mental health things in there and stuff that come up that are across the two things.
Absolutely.
And addictive personalities, one way or another.
Yeah, extreme personalities and one. Yeah.
And so. I know the other thing that you've been, again, from Twitter, the power of Twitter, that one of the other things that you've been up to is you've started a small press with another ex-guest, M.W. Leeming. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that.
That's Obliterati Press is our little indie press we started up, and that just came about because when we first met up, in fact it remains the only time we've actually met in person, which seems weird, but yeah, when we met up doing the big bookend event in Leeds, when Wayne's novel came out, when Justice is Served came out, we did a panel, Army Press panel, and we were just having a curry and a couple of drinks the night before, and me and Wayne just got talking, and he said something about always wanted to do a little indie press of his own, and I said, that thought occurred to me, or when music was my main focus, I'd thought of, like a little indie record label kind of thing, and he said, we should do our own one as well, as well as Army Press, and I just kind of laughed it off at the time. Didn't really give it much thought, but we used to speak on the phone and on Skype quite a lot, just sort of talking about each other's work and what was going on with our books and that kind of thing. And Wayne was really into the idea, and he just sort of kept saying, you should really think about it. We could we could do something similar to Army Press and other little indie publishers that we admire. And the more I thought about it, I thought, well, why not? Because the things that would have put me off doing it, things I thought I wouldn't have been able to do, Wayne is quite good at. He's not bad with like design and stuff. He's designed the website pretty much single-handedly. I've made some suggestions, but he's basically completely done the website, and he's done a bit of work on the book cover, although we've got someone else to do the basic template we were working from. He's done a fair bit there. He's a very good editor. I think that's one of his main strengths. He's got a really good eye for things like format and just for attention to detail, which I don't necessarily have. Mm-hmm. So that they were sort of his main strengths, which complemented the fact that I knew a few writers who I thought we should approach rather than setting up and just putting out a call for submissions, which could either go unanswered because you're unheard of, or could get deluged with tons of work and you never get the time to read it properly or do it justice. Like I said, the way we should do it, before we actually set anything up and announce it, I'll approach these two writers who I know, who one had self-published one thing, but I knew he had a finished but unpublished novel, and there was another guy who I knew from the Autonomy website, the HarperCollins website, who had a book on there which I really liked, which I knew was unpublished. So I just sent them an email, told them what we were thinking of doing, and said, would you let us read your manuscripts, for the time being? Would you just let us read them? And then if we like them, you can decide whether you're willing to let us put it out, sort of thing. And I think they were both at the point where they've been through the usual rigmarole of getting rejected and things like that, they were quite open to the idea of letting us have a go with it kind of thing. And they're both absolutely brilliant novels. The first one we've got coming out in November is called Lord of the Dead by Richard Rippon, and it's just an absolutely fantastic crime thriller. It is a proper, police procedural, serial killer crime thriller, in the kind of like, the regional crime thing, which is very popular in this country. It's set in the northeast. It's very distinctive because of that. It's got other really interesting, distinctive things about it. The two main characters, one's a man with cerebral palsy, so it's got a disabled lead character, and the other lead character is a very strong female character, and it's just got a brilliant story. It's absolutely gripping right from the start. And me and Wayne just keep saying to each other, we can't believe how lucky we are to have this as our first one. It's so good. It's as good as any regional crime thriller you could hope to read. It's fantastic. Brilliant. So we just can't to put that out. We're sort of doing we've got a few copies printed just for the three of us, for me and Wayne and Richard, and we're just sort of going through it now and spotting a few mistakes and things like that. And once that's done, it's ready to go in November. Having a launch up in Newcastle, which should be good, and be a nice pre-Christmas thriller read for people.
Yeah, it sounds good.
It really is. I mean, it's so good. Like, I keep thinking, how has it not been published by someone else, but I'm just very glad that it hasn't been, that me and Wayne have got the chance to put it out as our first book. And then we've got another one in, we think probably February, March sort of time, called The Baggage Carousel, which is by a fella called Dave Olner. He's the guy I knew from Autonomy. And it's also brilliant, very different to Lord of the Dead. It's kind of like a travelogue story. This guy called Dan, who's traveling around Africa, he's very pissed off. He's got job that he hates. His family are a mess, and he spends most of his time traveling around, and he meets up with this girl called Amber from Australia, who's also at a similar kind of crossroads in her life. And it's kind of like a twisted travelogue love story, but it's just brilliant. And the lead character he's just one of those characters that I think sort of pissed off young men are really going to relate to, like, sort of Holden Caulfield type, and the way that some people really seem to relate to Gary Lennon from my first book. I think Dan will be that kind of character. People are just going to love him. They'll hate him in some ways, but they'll absolutely love the character because he's just brilliantly written and funny and compelling.
That sounds great.
I can't wait to put that outside. Then we've got a couple of other things sort of in the pipeline, which should easily see us through the first year of being in operation. We don't want to be too prolific. We say one book a quarter at the most, I think, because it's hard to give everything the attention it deserves. I mean, I still work full time, so my time's limited, and we're both trying to do our own writing and stuff as well. And obviously we've both got families and everything, so I think you don't want to take too much on, and you don't want to risk messing it up, because it's a big responsibility. It's one thing to have your own work being put out by someone else, but to have that responsibility of putting someone else's work out, and what they've been through, how important it is to them if you're a writer yourself. The last thing you want to do is fuck it up. You want to do it right. So we're going to take it very slowly for the first year or two at least, and just see how it goes. Hopefully we'll make some inroads. So we've got 2 brilliant books to start off with, and hopefully 2 other ones which are in the pipeline will be just as good as well. And hopefully we'll get a bit more attention and sell some copies and get a bit of a reputation for ourselves.
Well, it's obvious that the most important thing is the passion that you've got for it, and it's obvious you've got that in abundance. So it sounds like it's going to be a success. It sounds really exciting.
Yeah, and we certainly hope so. I mean, the way we're going about it, we're pretty hopeful it can't fail as such, because we're doing, like Armley Press do, we're doing the print-on-demand model, so we don't have to put loads of money into it. We've both had to put some money in to get the website done and to get a logo designed and things like that, and there's a few other little sort of operational costs to be setting up. But then once all that's done, you've basically just got the print run to pay for, and you hopefully will make that back pretty quickly. If you print off 40 copies and sell 25, I think 25, 28, something like that is the point at which you break even, so you've not lost any money. So it's pretty hard to lose any money on the books themselves. You're not taking a risk printing off 500 or 1,000 copies and then trying to flog them. You know, you just sell them as people order them. People order it on Amazon, it gets printed, so the cost is already covered, and then the rest of it's profit for you to share with the writers, and our profits will probably just be put back into operational costs, you know, effectively almost like a non-profit organisation, you know, just using what we make to sustain ourselves, but hopefully the writers will make a few quid, because, you know, that's one of the things about being a writer at our kind of level. It's very hard to make any money from it whatsoever, so hopefully we'll be able to do that for them at least, and then as we hopefully get bigger, maybe we'll be able to make a little bit of profit for ourselves, which will be nice.
Do you think that kind of model, especially on the back of like I know obviously lots more people are doing self-publishing and things, and self-publishing is great, but as you've mentioned there, even if you've got a small press or even a traditional publisher behind you, you're not guaranteed, you know, that you're going to sell lots and lots of books, because it's difficult to stand out there and stuff. So do you think this idea of, like, you know, a number of writers, artists, creatives or whatever, so I know it's not a brand new idea, but in terms of publishing, and maybe, you know, it's kind of going back to that kind of punk ethic that I've talked to,
it is, yeah,
to Harmony Press about and stuff like that before. So do you think that, you know, the more of that might happen in the future?
I think it will. I can't even imagine that some bigger publishers won't start thinking in those terms as well, just because, you know, there seems to be so little money around. People are so scared to spend anything. Even the big publishers think, well, why don't you keep your costs down by doing something like print on demand? You know, I mean, it's kind of obvious for someone like us setting up, you know, because we just haven't got the money to be printing off hundreds and hundreds of copies. You know, it's just completely impractical, and, you know, financially would be totally unsustainable. You know,
it's wasteful as well.
It is, you know, because you're not guaranteed to sell. You know, you hope you will, and you got the confidence in the work, and you got the confidence that you're going to put everything you've got into trying to make the books a success. But, you know, to print off 500 copies would just be madness. You know, it's the only option, I think, really, for someone like us. You know, unless you've got some kind of funding from somewhere. You know, if you've got like Arts Council funding or something like that, you know, then you can afford to maybe be a bit more ambitious in those terms. But I think if you're just a couple of people setting up like me and Wayne are, it's the obvious choice. And it's the same with Harmony Press. You know, you mentioned like the old punk rock aesthetic. You know, they call themselves punk publishers, and I think that's a really good way of looking at it. You know, like the old sort of punk rock labels and indie labels and stuff like that, they all had to keep the costs down as much as they possibly could, and the few people that worked there had to do as much as they possibly could. You know, someone who was maybe ostensibly in charge of signing the bands would end up designing the record covers and things like that, you know, and the person who's maybe meant to be in charge of the legal side ends up licking envelopes and putting stamps on things. You know, you just got to kind of do as much as you possibly can, spread what skills you've got as wide as they can possibly go, and keeping the costs down is obviously going to be a big part of that.
Well, that kind of feeds into, I'm going to move on to do our weekly tweets of the week. And one of them in particular, the first one I was going to talk about was, it's actually a podcast, which I have not had I must freely admit I've not actually had a chance to listen to yet, but it's on my downloaded podcast to listen to. But the transcript is available online anyway. It's Joanna Penn. I don't know whether you listen to Joanna Penn much, Nathan, but it's quite good to listen to if you're looking at self-publishing and making money from writing and stuff. But anyway, one of the latest shows that she's done is called Real Artists Don't Starve, Creativity and Money. And it's the guest that she's got on there is Jeff Goins, or Goins, I'm not sure how you pronounce his surname. And he's written a book about, making the most, being a creative, and this idea that you have to be a starving writer or a starving artist or whatever is kind of a bit outdated, and that you can kind of get sucked into this idea that, you know, you're just doing it for the art, darling. You know, which we all are. You know, that's why you want to do it. The main reason you do it in the first place is because you love doing it, but you want to keep doing it and you want it to be sustainable, like the Obliterati Press or anything else that you set up. You need to kind of approach it. So I'll put the link to that in the show notes, but that is it's quite an interesting, I've read a lot of the transcript, and it's quite an interesting topic, and there's
it sounds interesting.
I
agree with the idea. You know, I hate that notion that writers and artists have got to be starving to death, otherwise they're not authentic or whatever. You know, it's absolutely bullshit. You know, we've all got to pay the bills, haven't we? You know, we've all got kids to feed and everything. You know, you slog your guts out trying to create something that's, you know, hopefully connects with people, why shouldn't you try and monetize it as well if you can? As you say, nobody, I can't imagine anyone sets out to be a writer to make money, because
it's a fool's errand.
You're probably going to be very disappointed, but
yeah.
If you do put the time and effort into it, it's work, isn't it? In a way, I know it's a craft and it's something you do because, you've kind of got this need to express yourself or whatever, but it is also work. You have to work hard at it.
Absolutely. And you want to grow an audience. I mean, that's the other thing. One of the biggest things is you want to connect to other people, and you want other people to read what you're doing. I mean, that's probably, the money thing is kind of a nice byproduct of that. But I think for a lot of people, it's, I just want to get the thing out there and have actually people kind of read it and, hear what I've got to say, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I could choose between, 1 million people reading and liking me work, but not making a penny from it, or making a small amount of money but not reaching as many people, I would choose to reach more people. That's more important than the money, obviously. There's no way that's your main motivating factor, but it's definitely something you have to think about, isn't it? How can you make money from it? How can you monetize it or whatever? And it's very difficult. I've done fairly well with my first book, but I've not really made any kind of significant money. I've made a little bit and it was nice. It was more than I expected, but I still work full time because it's completely unreliable, and the amount I made, will barely cover a couple of months' wages.
Yeah, well, hold that thought, because that is actually something I want to talk to you about in a little bonus episode that we're going to have on, I'd say, the epilogue, because I do want to explore that a little bit more. That very topic. The other tweet of the week that I've got was by Angela Ackerman, who's actually coming on the show in a couple of weeks' time as well. Angela Ackerman wrote the Emotional Thesaurus book, amongst other things. I don't know whether you've ever looked at that. It's quite useful, like kind of quick thing that you can just pick up if you've got I mean, it sounds like one of these things, well, I'm a writer, I just should be able to do that, but it's actually very, very useful if you you're dealing with a character and they're in a scene and they need to be feeling sick or worried or angry about something. This kind of gives you some little shorthand things that you should be thinking about, so not just going for the obvious cliches all the time. If someone's shaking because they're scared, there's all the different things. So it's quite useful. But she writes a series of these books, but the actual post that I was interested in that she tweeted was, why is your character's emotional wound so important? And it's kind of talking about backstory, but it's kind of being aware of what that wound is and how it leads on to other things, and that you should be aware of it. It's quite an interesting post. I'll put a link to it, but it got me thinking again about your work in particular. I mean, you've got your first novel, but the novel that I've just finished reading, Out of the City, so you've got at least 2 characters in that book that have got quite hefty emotional baggage that they're carrying around. Well, particularly
emotional wounds. Yeah,
especially Nick. He's obviously got really bad emotional wounds, and I don't know what you thought about that, or whether in terms of your backstory, when you're thinking about backstory. I mean, in the case of Out of the City, it sounds like you just had this idea and it just kind of came out. But in general, how much do you think about backstory? Are you one of these people that kind of makes notes about it or thinks about it or explores it much?
With Out of the City, it was kind of the 2 separate things that I kind of wanted to explore. I wanted to do like a sort of contemporary thriller type novel, and I wanted to write about the father-son dynamic, which is very important in this book. And there were 2 separate things I wanted to write about, not necessarily together. I love thrillers, and I've always wanted to try and write a thriller just to see if I can do it. Because I think it's quite a hard genre to do well. I love a good thriller. I wanted to see if I could do it, and there was this other issue that I really wanted to write about. So I just kind of decided to combine the 2. So that was the backstory, was the relationship with his father, and it just kind of fed very well into the present day aspect of it, and it gives it just makes you see the character a different way. You see him doing pretty terrible things to begin with, and then you sort of get the odd flashback into things that have happened in his past, and you think, well, obviously that's why he's as fucked up as he is, because of things like that have gone on. But I think backstory is important. Not always. It depends on what you're writing. I mean, with The World's Not a Cold Dead Place, I actually took out loads of backstory because I didn't think it was important. I had a couple of chapters that explained very specifically why Gary was like he was, and I just thought that actually made him less interesting than, just having him appear fully formed sort of thing. I thought that just for that particular novel, it worked better for him not to have a backstory. And I think sometimes it's a mistake some writers make where they do go back, and if they've got an interesting character, they sometimes feel they need to do like a prequel, or in subsequent sequels they have to have this section where they explain things like Hannibal Lecter, for example.
Yeah, definitely.
In Hannibal, it had to have that bit where it was explaining what had happened to him in his childhood, and what had happened to his sister. And I thought, you don't need to explain Hannibal Lecter.
No.
It's great for him just to be as he is. You have the little backstory aspect in Red Dragon, the first book. When the investigation that Will Graham was doing with him before he sort of turned against him, sort of thing, and that was interesting. But that's as much as you need with someone like Hannibal Lecter, or like the Joker. The most sort of revered Batman comics is Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, and I love Alan Moore, he's a genius, but I can't stand The Killing Joke because it explains why the Joker is like the Joker. You don't need to explain that. It makes him far less interesting, far less scary to have him.
It's a bit more enigmatic.
Yeah, just to arrive fully formed, I think that's more interesting for some characters. But, as with everything, it depends on the individual story that you're working on. Sometimes it's essential. Sometimes I think it's completely superfluous. And sometimes it can even damage it, I think.
Well, for me, I think the important thing is the word back. I mean, it should be way in the back. I think the main thing with it is that you should know, even if you haven't actually stopped and written it down and, you've got the ins and outs. I think deep down, even if it's on an instinctual level, you should know.
Yeah. And you don't have to explain it to the reader necessarily.
Exactly.
A lot of things that, like a lot of actors do it, and they're playing a character who, is in a certain setting, they'll work out an entire backstory to what's happened to them, and it won't be in the film or the play. It
just informs how they react to certain situations.
No, they know everything about the character's past, but the audience or the viewer will never actually get to see it. It just helps them understand the character a little bit better and have more sort of ownership of the character. And I think it's probably the same thing when you're writing fiction. You don't have to explain it to the reader, but you need to have a certain sense of control over what's happened to the character in the past.
Well, I'm really lucky because I'm in this critique group that I've mentioned before, but I now give one of the older members of the group, I basically give her a lift most weeks, and she's got tons and tons and tons of experience. She's really direct and she's a bit of a character. But now every time she gets in the car, we've got like this 20-minute car journey to the critique group each week, and every time she gets in the car, she will just fire a random question at me about my character in my novel.
All right.
She'll like say, where did his mum and dad meet? Or what did his mum used to do for a living? And it's like, I've never bothered to. Some of these things I'll just know. I'll just answer her. I'll say, oh yeah, she worked in a factory, or she did this, and I'll just know. And that's partly what she's kind of testing, because it's like how well I know my character. A lot of these things I should just know, even if I don't know the real specifics of it. And I think that's probably the same for you with Out of the City. You obviously wrote it really quick, but you had that initial kernel of the idea, and you must have felt that on some level you just kind of knew these characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it'd been sort of gestating in my head for quite a while before I started writing it. But yeah, even I think as you're writing it, it develops as well. And you kind of develop this little backstory and little bits of information about them, which you don't need to put in the text itself. But yeah, you have to think about that. I think that's an interesting exercise, though. That what she's doing, just firing random questions at you.
It's good. It's good.
If someone was to do that to me, whether I'd actually be able to answer.
It is. But the thing with it is, I mean, there's been some that I haven't been able to answer, or I've had to go away and think about. But in doing so, I've thought, yeah, you know what? Now I think sometimes it inspires something else that could happen in the novel, and other times I think, in hindsight, he probably wouldn't have reacted the way that he reacted in that particular scene. That's probably not quite right. So it is quite an interesting thing to try. It's a good exercise to try. Okay, let's just take a quick breather from our chat with Nathan to bring you the first of a new segment of the show where we feature a quick 3-minute review from one of the great book bloggers who are kind enough to record one of their recent posts for us. We're calling it BBC, Book Bloggers Corner, and a very first review comes from American author and blogger Amy Brown. Amy blogs over at lovechicklit.com, but she also has her own author website, authoramybrown.com, where you can find details about the upcoming release of her own debut novel, Little Grey Dress. And in fact, Amy will be a guest on the show in a couple of weeks' time, so look out for that. Okay, cue the jingle.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
I Have Never by author Camilla Eiley. 29-year-old Blair Walker is a girl with a plan, or more, a girl with a list. A list of do's and don'ts to live the perfect life, land a dream career, and marry Mr. Right. But when Blair loses her job and gets dumped by her boyfriend all in one day, she starts to wonder if she's had it all wrong. And what better way to find out than experience everything the list forbade? Never lie, never pick a fight, never make a scene, never make the first move, never make impulse decisions, never mix business and pleasure. With hilarious consequences, Blair will discover some items are trickier to tick off than she'd thought. I read this book earlier than some, and like every single Camilla Eiley book, I fell in love. What a cute title to go with the game that Blair often plays throughout the book. And I just love her name, so cute. I love Blair's girly side, yet she's so feisty, it really makes you fall in love with her right from the start. Her quest to lose her list of needs and wants and finally find Mr. Right is absolutely perfect. The fact that she literally does the opposite of everything she once planned in life puts her in some pretty awkward situations, to say the least. I'm not sure there was a moment that I didn't love in this book. I read it straight through in only a few hours, and I was so sad to see it end. As usual, with all Eiley books, you will laugh, root for all the characters, and fall in love with this book, and possibly even Mr. Right too. I would highly recommend anything written by Camilla, but if you only chose one, this one is perfect.
Book Bloggers Corner.
Okay, thanks again go to Amy Brown, book blogger and author, and the book she was speaking about there was I Have Never by Camilla Eiley. Okay, let's get back to the chat I was having with Nathan O'Hagan, where we were talking about research. I mean, as regards that and knowing your characters and everything else, I know you touched on it earlier on with the research side of things. Like you mentioned, you fired off some emails to somebody that you used to know used to be a copper and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But obviously, there's some very specific lifestyles, shall we say, and locations in out of the city. Now, I appreciate you probably know a lot of the locations because you're from that neck of the woods originally. But like, for example, there's, you mentioned there's a bodybuilder in there and he's heavily using steroids, and there's a whole the kind of the gay scene in Liverpool and all that kind of thing. How do you have to run through, like, I mean, you may or may not have got lots of experience of some of that stuff, I don't know, but in terms of like authenticity, did you want to run that by anybody else to kind of get like, does this ring true or whatever? You mentioned the thing specifically with the police side of it, but what about the other side of it? And how much kind of research do you do?
I mean, lots of the clubs and stuff that are mentioned in the book in Liverpool, they're real places. I think there's only one that I just made up, but the rest of them, they're pretty famous clubs. I mean, there's a place called the Curzon, which is mentioned a couple of times, and that's just, it's sort of legendary in Liverpool. I think it's not, if not one of possibly the oldest gay bars in Liverpool, possibly even the region or the country. It's been around for a very long time. Everyone knows it. Have you ever seen the film Priest with Linus Roach and Robert Carlyle? It's about sort of based on a real stuff.
Is that Bleasdale, is it, that wrote that?
I don't think it was Bleasdale. I can't remember who wrote it. I know McGovern.
No. Yeah, Jimmy McGovern. Sorry, Jimmy McGovern. Yeah, I have seen it. Yeah, it's good. Yeah,
that was the club scenes, and that are filmed in the Curzon. So everyone in Liverpool knows the Curzon, but there's like obviously a lot of newer ones that I've not lived in the region for about 8 years now. So there's probably loads of clubs that I'd never heard of. So it was the simple thing of Googling, just to make sure the club actually exists and it was roughly in the right sort of location. I didn't feel like I had to do a huge amount of research. I mean, I've been to some of the places, I've heard of some of the places, and some of them, I just found out purely by Googling and seeing what's where now, because Liverpool's changed a hell of a lot in the time that I've been away. But that kind of suited me in some ways because I've taken certain liberties with it anyway. Like there's a big sort of office block where Nick works and where Michael Epsom works, and I've just kind of, in my head, I've just plonked it right in the middle of the city centre. It's basically crushed several buildings that are actually there just to create Epsom Tower. just for my own sort of purposes. So I think, you've got to things have to feel basically authentic and right. They can't be kind of too jarring that someone who either lives in a certain place or has a certain lifestyle or whatever, you want it to ring true on some level, but I think you can maybe distract yourself a little bit too much with, exact details when it comes to research and things, but you've got to make sure it's authentic and you can't take too many liberties, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I often just leave gaps, to be honest. If I'm like, I need to check that, I'll just usually put it in like square brackets or something. Need to check this, or need to know what this road is here, or name of gun here, or whatever it is. Yeah. Just because I completely agree. I've fell into that trap before where I'm like, actually, I'll just Google that, and then before you know it, an hour later you're down the rabbit hole and you've not done any writing.
Yeah, I mean, I did the exact same thing, trying to find the right type of gun for him to have, and I was just going, through reams and reams of Google research, and in the end, I just checked with my mate who's the cop and said, is this gun, not readily available, but is it likely this make of gun would end up in this person's hand via this method? And he basically said, yeah, that sounds about right. That's basic.
Yeah.
Well, that's good enough. I'll leave it at that. You can, like you say, you just fall down the rabbit hole. You lose a couple of days of writing, just researching things to, the nth degree.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we'll think about bringing it to a close. As I say, we will have another little chat for the epilogue. But just in general terms, do you want to just tell us what you've got coming up next, or where people can find, just to remind people where they can find your stuff, where they can find Out of City and your other stuff, and obviously a little bit about Obliterati Press?
Yeah, well, all my stuff's on Amazon. You can follow me on Twitter at Nathan O'Hagan with a capital N, capital O, capital H. Obliterati Press is obliteratipress.com is the website, hardly original, but I should do it. And the Twitter account for Obliterati is at Obliterati Press, capital O, capital P. So follow us on there. And we're on Facebook as well. And we hope to have a few other multimedia things going on as well. We hope to get a YouTube channel up fairly soon with a couple of people doing short stories to camera and some book trailers and things like that. And also, if any writers are listening, we're always open to short story submissions. We haven't got a novel submission window yet, but we will do probably early next year, possibly later this year. But we're always open to blog posts and short story submissions. In fact, we'd welcome them. We've been quite lucky. We've had a few really good ones. Me and Wayne have put one up each as well. But we found a couple of good writers, and a really good writer called Joe Hacking was kind enough to give us the first story that we put up. So we're open to blog posts, short stories. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and look out for Lord of the Dead in November, because it's absolutely fantastic. And then The Baggage Carousel sometime early next year.
That sounds great. Well, really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for chatting. Pleasure. As usual. Brilliant. Well, that pretty much wraps up this week's show, but before I go, I wanted to remind you that this is your show. So let us know what you want to hear, because we're looking to add more varied content. We're open to more collaborations, like the book review segment that was on today's show. And with that in mind, don't forget to get in touch if you want us to feature one of your book reviews that you might have got on your blog, or if you know other bloggers that might be interested in reaching a wider audience and just trying something a bit different. I think Amy had fun. I'll be able to talk to her a bit about that in a couple of weeks. But the biggest favour that you can do for us is to share the podcast with at least one of your friends, and make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever else you want to listen to these things. We're also going to get them on YouTube again in the near future. But iTunes in particular, it takes seconds to leave a quick review, and it really makes a difference, and it just helps other people find the show. Give us a reason to keep doing this. We are doing it for nothing, just putting the time in. We want to put it out. We want to keep putting good content out. We want to keep speaking to more authors. We love doing this. So let us know how we can just keep making it better. You can get in touch on Twitter at JU Podcast. You can find us on Facebook, which is Joined Up Writing Podcast. And you can find us on the web, joinedupwriting.co.uk. You can also find me on Twitter at MrKelly2U. And that pretty much wraps this up, so we can get back to the cheesy theme tune again. So thanks for listening to the Joined Up Writing Podcast. Let's get joined up. Happy writing, and see you next time.
Pick up your pen and start your typing. We'll see you all again for some joined up writing.